My phone would not stop vibrating. I was standing at the kitchen counter with a letter spread open in front of me when Adrian walked in and looked from my face to the screen. Again, I turned the phone toward him. 67 missed calls. Most were from Mom and Dad. Underneath them were messages that had gotten more aggressive by the hour. Mom, call us now. Dad, do not sign anything. Then another from Mom. Lenshina, that land was a wedding gift. This is not what we agreed to. I read that one twice. What agreement? Adrian asked. I looked back at the letter on the counter. There hadn't been an agreement. There had been a gift. A very public one. 3 months earlier, in front of almost everyone we knew, my parents had proudly announced that my younger sister Melissa was getting their 4-bedroom family home. I was getting a tiny piece of neglected land off Mill Creek Road. Dad had laughed about it. My uncle had laughed about it. Even Melissa had joked that I finally owned my own field. Now the same land sat at the center of a formal acquisition letter from the city. The figure printed near the bottom was so large I had checked the commas twice. $4 million. Adrian picked up the letter again. Are you calling them back? I looked at the 67 missed calls. 3 months ago, Dad told everyone that land was barely worth mowing. Then my phone buzzed again. Dad. I let it ring. Because the last time he had held a microphone and talked about that property, he had no idea what it was about to become. At my wedding reception, I thought Dad was finally going to say something about me. Adrian and I had kept the wedding modest. Small venue, close family, a few friends from work, nothing extravagant. By the time dinner ended, I was relaxed enough to believe we might actually make it through one family event without Melissa becoming the center of it. Then Dad stood up. Can I borrow the microphone? People clapped before he even started. I smiled. For one stupid second, I thought he was going to tell some story about raising me. Maybe say he was proud of me. Instead, he looked across the room at Mom. We decided we didn't want to wait until we were gone to start passing things on to our girls. Everyone immediately reacted. Aunt Sandra pressed both hands together. Someone behind me said, "Oh, that's sweet," Dad continued. "We're giving each of our daughters some property." I glanced at Adrian. He looked just as surprised as I felt. Dad turned first toward Melissa. "Come up here." Melissa laughed and stepped away from her table. Dad put an arm around her. "Your mother and I have decided the house should be yours." The room erupted. Melissa covered her mouth. "You're serious?" Mom was already crying. "Our house?" Melissa asked. Dad nodded. "The whole thing. The 4-bedroom house where we had both grown up. The one with the wide back porch and the oak tree Mom photographed every fall. The house that, for as long as I could remember, represented our family." Melissa threw her arms around them. Relatives cheered. I clapped too. Then Dad looked at me and Lenshina. The room quieted. He smiled. "For the bride, we're giving you the old parcel out by Mill Creek Road." There was applause, but not the same applause. I knew the property immediately. 8/10 of an acre. No house. No connected utilities. Mostly weeds and brush. An old service road ran along one side, a drainage easement cut across another. Dad had complained about that land for years. Property taxes, overgrowth, people dumping trash near the roadside. Uncle Raymond leaned toward him. "Wait, you mean that little lot you're always complaining about?" Dad laughed. "That's the one." A few people laughed with him. I felt Adrian's hand close around mine beneath the table. Mom rushed in before the silence could get uncomfortable. "Now both our girls have property." There it was. The family version of fairness. Technically equal. Emotionally nowhere close. Melissa had gotten the house. I had gotten the thing Dad was tired of maintaining. I stood anyway. "Thank you." Dad's shoulders dropped like he had been expecting a fight and was relieved I hadn't given him one. That had been my role for years. Melissa needed the larger bedroom because she had more things. Melissa needed help buying her first car because I was already good with money. When Dad's work slowed down and the house needed a new roof, I helped cover part of the repair. Mom called that responsibility. When Melissa needed money, Mom called it support. And whenever I pointed out the difference, The conversation somehow ended with me being jealous. I was not doing that at my wedding. Later, while everyone was dancing, I caught Dad near the bar. Are you sure about the lot? He looked almost amused. Of course. I'm asking because once we do the paperwork, I want it done properly. Fine by me. You really want it out of your name. He took a sip of his drink. Maintaining that thing is pointless. Then he smiled. Maybe you and Adrian can find some use for it someday. Melissa appeared beside us, holding a glass of champagne. So when are you inviting us out to the estate? Dad laughed. I looked at her. What estate? Your field. She grinned. You're officially a landowner now. I smiled just enough to end it. Adrian did not. That night, after the reception, he asked me the question I had been avoiding. Why did they announce both gifts at your wedding? I took off one earring and set it on the dresser. I don't know. Yes, you do. I looked at him in the mirror. It wasn't about the money. Then what was it? Melissa got the thing that mattered. The house. I nodded. And I got the thing Dad wanted gone. Adrian leaned against the dresser. You don't have to pretend that didn't hurt. I'm not pretending. He raised an eyebrow. I exhaled. Maybe I am a little. Then I made a decision. I'm taking the land. Okay. And I'm not fighting with them about it. Okay. I'm not begging my parents to explain why Melissa always gets the better version of everything. Adrian nodded slowly. Then make sure it's actually yours. That part I knew how to do. I worked as a municipal infrastructure project coordinator. My job taught me quickly that informal promises were worth almost nothing once property, contractors, easements, and money were involved. So, over the next few weeks, I made sure the transfer was clean. The deed identified the exact Mill Creek Road parcel. Dad signed. Mom signed. I completed the acceptance paperwork. The deed was recorded. I paid the fees. When everything was finished, Dad called me. Well, he said, congratulations. Thanks. The weeds are officially your problem. He laughed. I didn't. Several weeks later, an envelope arrived, addressed to me as the recorded property owner. I assumed it was a tax notice. I opened it, standing in the hallway. Instead, the letterhead belonged to the city's infrastructure acquisition office. I read the first paragraph twice. They wanted to discuss purchasing my property. At first, I assumed they needed an easement. That made sense. A strip near the road, maybe drainage access. Something routine. I called the number listed. A man answered and confirmed my parcel number. Are you the sole recorded owner? Yes. Have you entered into any agreement to sell the property? No. We'd like to schedule a formal meeting. I looked back at the letter. What exactly does the city need? There was a pause. Potentially all of it. That changed everything. I didn't call my parents. I called a property attorney. Then I ordered an independent appraisal. Over the next 2 weeks, the pieces started lining up. The land was almost useless for building a home. But that was not why the city wanted it. The parcel sat across a critical section of a planned transportation corridor. Nearby properties had already been quietly acquired. Mine was one of the remaining pieces needed to connect the route. Then the formal offer arrived. Adrian stood beside me while I opened it. I read the figure once, then again. $4 million. My phone started vibrating before I had even put the letter down. Dad, then Mom, then Dad again. Melissa, Mom, Dad. By that evening, I had 67 missed calls, but the money was no longer the only thing bothering me. I looked at Adrian. How do they already know? Dad's first voicemail came before breakfast. Lenshina, do not respond to the city until we sort this out as a family. I played it twice. Not because I misunderstood him, because of the word family. When the land had been a weed-covered nuisance, there had been nothing to sort out. Dad had signed the deed, joked that the upkeep was finally my problem, and moved on. Now that someone wanted to pay millions for it, apparently the property belonged to all of us again. I still didn't call him back. By noon, Mom was at my front door. Adrian looked through the window beside it. You want me here? Yes. I opened the door. Mom walked in without waiting to be invited. Your father has been trying to reach you. I know. Then why aren't you answering? Because I wanted to understand what was happening before everybody started telling me what I should do. She set her purse down harder than necessary. This isn't something you should be handling alone. I'm not. I have an attorney. Her expression changed immediately. You hired a lawyer? I own property the city wants to buy. Of course I hired a lawyer. Lenshina, this is exactly what I mean. Everything is moving too fast. I folded my arms. What exactly is moving too fast? Mom looked toward Adrian, then back at me. The whole situation. What situation? The mistake. I waited. She seemed to expect me to fill in the blank for her. I didn't. Finally, I asked, what mistake? She exhaled. We never thought you would turn around and sell the land. That wasn't part of the gift. That doesn't mean there weren't expectations. What expectations? That you would keep it. Dad said he didn't want it anymore. That isn't the point. It sounds like exactly the point. Mom's jaw tightened. That property has been in the family for years. So has the house. She looked at me. I continued. Melissa owns that now. This is different. Why? Because nobody is offering her $4 million. There it was. Not family history, not sentiment, money. I stepped closer to the counter. If someone offered Melissa $4 million for the house tomorrow, would you ask her to sign it back to you? Mom's eyes shifted away from mine. That's different. You just said that. Because it is. How? She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Your father has a solution. I stared at it. What solution? You transfer the lot back to us temporarily. I almost laughed. Temporarily. Yes. And then what? Then we sit down as a family and divide things properly. I looked at Adrian. He said nothing, but his expression said enough. I turned back to Mom. You want me to give back property you legally transferred to me because it became valuable. We want to correct something none of us understood. No, you understood exactly what you were giving me. Her face hardened. You are making this ugly. I'm repeating what happened. We gave you land as a wedding gift. You gave Melissa a house. And now you have something worth far more. That wasn't my decision. Mom lowered her voice. Money changes people. I stared at her. You came to my house with paperwork asking me to transfer $4 million worth of property back to you. That is not what I said. It is exactly what you said. She pushed the paper toward me. Just read it. I didn't touch it. Did Dad write this? He had it prepared. By who? That doesn't matter. It matters to me. Mom's eyes flashed. Lenshina, your father is trying to keep this family together. No, he's trying to undo a gift because he thinks he made a bad deal. Her voice rose. We did not make a deal with you. Exactly. She stopped. I let the silence sit there. Then I said, it was a gift. Her shoulders stiffened. You always do this. Do what? Turn everything with Melissa into a competition. I actually laughed then. You came here because my property became worth more than hers. That is not what this is about. Then leave her house out of it. Mom looked toward the floor. I continued. You didn't ask Melissa to divide the house. You didn't ask her to sign it back so we could sort things out. You only care about fairness now because the thing you gave me accidentally became the valuable one. Her face went pale with anger. We did not think the land was worthless. Dad called it a weed patch. He jokes. He complained about paying taxes on it for years. That doesn't mean... He told me maintaining it was pointless. Mom stopped speaking. I stepped toward the folded paper and pushed it back across the counter. I'm not signing that. Her eyes narrowed. You haven't even read it. I don't need to. You are willing to destroy your relationship with your father over money. No. I held her gaze. I'm refusing to hand back something you gave me because you regret what happened afterward. Mom grabbed the paper. You're going to wish you had handled this differently. Then she picked up her purse and walked out. The front door slammed behind her. Adrian waited a few seconds. That went well. I let out a breath. She came here expecting me to sign it. She expected the old version of you to sign it. I looked at him. The old version. The one who would have wondered whether saying no made me selfish. The one who would have tried to prove I wasn't jealous. I went upstairs and pulled out every document connected to the property. The deed, the recording confirmation, the gift paperwork, the city's first letter, the formal acquisition offer. I scanned everything and sent it to my attorney. Then I added one sentence. My parents are trying to get me to transfer the property back. Please review everything before I respond to anyone. He called that evening. First, he said, the deed is valid. I sat straighter. Completely? Based on what you sent me, yes. The transfer was completed. There's no condition in the deed requiring you to retain the property, share proceeds, or return it. I closed my eyes for half a second. Okay, but there is something else. My hand tightened around the phone. What? I started looking at the city's acquisition history and the planning records around that corridor. And this project didn't appear out of nowhere. I stood up. What do you mean? There were preliminary planning notices before your wedding, early studies, possible route evaluations. My stomach tightened. Were offers already being made? No, nothing like the offer you received. The final route had not been approved yet. Then why does that matter? Because owners in the study area may have received notices that public works activity was being considered. I immediately thought of Mom standing in my kitchen. The family made a mistake. Dad would never have transferred it if he had known the city wanted it. I asked, are you saying my parents might have known? I'm saying they may have known there was interest in the area. I stared toward the front door Mom had slammed an hour earlier. Not a $4 million offer. Not certainty, but maybe something. Something they had never mentioned. My attorney continued. I'm pulling the timeline now. I barely heard him. One question had already taken over my mind. Did my parents know more than they claimed when they gave me that land? You're really going in there? Adrian's hand was still on the steering wheel as I looked toward Melissa's new house, my parents' old house. The same 4-bedroom home Dad had given her at my wedding. Cars lined both sides of the street. Mom had invited relatives over to celebrate Melissa moving in, and judging by the messages I'd received that afternoon, she had already made sure everyone knew about the city's offer. I'm done letting them tell the story without me, I said. Inside, Melissa was showing Aunt Sandra the renovations she planned for the kitchen. Mom saw me first. Her smile disappeared. Dad came out of the dining room a few seconds later. So you finally decided to talk to us. Several conversations stopped. I set my purse on a chair. I came to dinner. No, Dad said. You came because you know we need to settle this. Melissa stepped closer. Can we please not start? Dad ignored her. He looked straight at me. Your mother told me what happened at your house. Then she told you I'm not signing the property back. Aunt Sandra glanced between us. Signing what back? Dad's face tightened. This is a private family matter. You already told everyone about the offer, I said. Nobody spoke. That answered my question. Dad folded his arms. You received an unexpected offer because of a property your mother and I gave you. We're trying to correct an innocent mistake before you profit from it. Aunt Sandra frowned. But you gave her the land. Dad looked at her. We didn't know what it was worth. Neither did I. That was the part he kept leaving out. Melissa stepped between us. Okay, this doesn't have to become some huge fight. I looked at her. What do you suggest? She hesitated just long enough for me to know she already had an answer. Sell it. Dad said nothing. And? Melissa clasped her hands. Divide the money. I almost admired how casually she said it. Between who? You, Mom, Dad, and me. The room went completely still. I looked around us. At the staircase where Melissa and I used to race each other as children. At the family photograph still hanging in the hallway. At the hardwood floors I had helped Dad pay to repair years earlier. Then I looked back at my sister. Are you dividing this house 4 ways too? Melissa blinked. What? The house. Are we splitting it between you, me, Mom, and Dad? That's ridiculous. Why? Because the house was specifically given to me. I nodded. So was the land. Nobody rushed to rescue her from that one. Melissa's mouth opened, then closed. Dad stepped forward. You're deliberately twisting this. I'm using Melissa's rule. A parent should be allowed to correct a mistake. What mistake, Dad? His voice rose. Giving away property without knowing its true value. I looked directly at him. You knew exactly how you valued it. His expression changed. You stood at my wedding and gave Melissa this house because you thought it mattered. Then you gave me a lot you spent years complaining about because you wanted it off your hands. That is not true. Then why did you laugh when Uncle Raymond called it the property you hated paying taxes on? Dad glanced around the room. For the first time, he seemed aware that everyone listening had also been at my wedding. I continued. You didn't accidentally choose different gifts. You deliberately chose the house for Melissa and the land for me. Mom stepped in. Lenshina, enough. No, the only thing Dad got wrong was which one would end up being worth more. Aunt Sandra lowered her glass. Melissa looked at Dad. He rubbed his forehead. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. I had no way of knowing they would choose that route. I froze. What route? Dad's hand dropped. Mom looked sharply at him. Nobody moved. I asked again. What route, Dad? He shook his head. It was nothing. You just said you had no way of knowing they would choose that route. There had been some notices. My chest tightened. What notices? General notices. Public works. Possible development around Mill Creek. Before my wedding. He didn't answer immediately. That was enough. Melissa stared at him. Dad? He exhaled. Yes, before the wedding. I felt Adrian move closer behind me. You received letters about possible city work near the land before you gave it to me? They were vague. How many? I don't remember. And you never mentioned them? Because they meant nothing. Apparently they didn't. Dad slammed his palm against the dining table. I did not know anyone would offer $4 million. Several people jumped. I stayed where I was. I didn't say you did. Then stop acting like I hid $4 million from you. I'm asking why you've spent the last week pretending the city's interest came out of nowhere. Melissa looked between us. What letters? Dad turned toward her. This does not concern you. You just asked me to split the money. That was different. Melissa gave a short, disbelieving laugh. So you knew there might be something happening near the property. I knew there were studies. And you gave it to Lenshina anyway. Dad's face reddened. Because those studies happen all the time. Most go nowhere. That was the first thing he had said all evening that actually made sense. But it also exposed something else. He had seen a possibility. He had decided the possibility was worthless. Then he had handed the land to me. Dad pointed toward the hallway. Lenshina, you and I are discussing this privately. No. His eyes narrowed. What did you say? I said no. This is between you and me. It stopped being private when you told relatives I was profiting from your mistake. My phone rang. Everyone looked toward it. I pulled it from my purse. My attorney. I need to take this. I stepped into the hallway. Hello? Lenshina, are you somewhere you can talk? Yes. I need you to listen carefully. Do not sign anything your parents send you. I looked back toward the dining room. Dad was watching me. Why? There was a brief pause. Your father contacted my office. My grip tightened around the phone. What did he want? He's trying to challenge the transfer. I looked directly at Dad through the doorway. He didn't look away. Challenge it how? I was sitting across from my attorney the next morning with the deed between us. He turned the document toward me. Your father's position is essentially that he transferred the property under a mistaken understanding of its value. I stared at him. Can he undo it because he regrets what it became worth? Regret and a valid legal claim are two different things. He tapped the deed. There's no clause here saying ownership reverts if the property increases in value. No retained interest, no restriction on selling, no condition tied to the city. And the wedding? That helps establish intent. I had already sent him the video. Dad standing with the microphone. Dad calling the parcel my wedding gift. Dad smiling while everyone applauded. I also had his later messages confirming the transfer and the recording paperwork bearing both my parents' signatures. My attorney closed the folder. There's another issue that matters even more. He opened a timeline he had prepared. The preliminary corridor studies had started before my wedding. That explained Dad's letters. But the city had still been evaluating multiple possible routes. The preferred corridor wasn't formally selected until after your deed was recorded, he said. I leaned forward. And the acquisition? Later. So when Dad gave me the property, there was no $4 million offer for him to lose or for you to conceal. I sat back. For days, I had wondered whether my parents had somehow known exactly what was coming. Now the truth was less dramatic and somehow more revealing. Dad had received preliminary notices. He knew the city was studying the area. He had decided the chance of that tiny lot becoming important was too remote to matter. So he gave it to me anyway. Then the unlikely possibility became real, and suddenly his gift became his mistake. What happens now? I asked. Now you decide whether you want to proceed with the city. I looked at the original offer. Should I accept? Not yet. He recommended an independent valuation that accounted for the parcel's importance to the corridor, not merely what someone might pay to build on it. The city wasn't buying my land because it was a beautiful residential lot. They needed it because of where it sat. So I authorized the appraisal and formal negotiations. That decision changed the situation completely. I was no longer waiting to see whether Dad could take the land back. I was moving forward as its owner. 3 days later, Dad called. This time, I answered. Lenshina. His voice was controlled. Dad, we need to stop this before it goes any further. Your challenge? The sale. There isn't a sale yet. You know what I mean. I waited. He continued. I've spoken to people. This can still be handled reasonably. Reasonably for who? For everybody. That sounds like Mom's plan. Your mother is trying to protect the family. No, Mom asked me to transfer the property back so you could redistribute it. Dad exhaled sharply. You are treating this like we deliberately cheated you. I didn't say that. You keep comparing it to Melissa's house. Because you gave us both property on the same night. Melissa's situation is different. There was that sentence again. I walked toward the window. Why? She has children. She needed stability. And I didn't deserve something valuable? That is not what I said. You gave me what you thought was the smaller asset. Silence. I could hear him breathing. Then Dad finally said it. You know I wouldn't have given you that property if I'd known. I stopped moving. For once, I didn't argue. I wanted him to finish the thought himself. Known what? Another pause. Then, that it was worth more than Melissa's house. Everything became quiet. Not because I was shocked. Because he had finally said aloud what everyone had spent weeks avoiding. It wasn't about preserving land that had belonged to our family. It wasn't about sentiment. It wasn't even really about $4 million. Dad could accept Melissa receiving the more valuable gift. He could not accept me receiving it. I said, thank you. For what? For finally telling me the truth. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. Lenshina. I ended the call. Minutes later, an email from my attorney appeared. The final title review was complete. I opened the attached documents. No competing ownership interest. No condition attached to the gift. Nothing giving my parents the right to reclaim the parcel because its value had changed. Dad's challenge had no viable basis to stop me from proceeding. Then I reached the updated acquisition paperwork. The city's confirmed figure remained approximately $4 million. There was a signature line beneath it. My signature line. I printed the documents and placed them on the kitchen table. Adrian came in and looked at them. This is it? I nodded. If I move forward, there's no pretending this can go back to the way it was. Do you want it to? Before I could answer, someone pounded on the front door. Not the doorbell. A fist. 3 hard knocks. Adrian looked toward the hallway. I already knew. I walked to the window and looked outside. Dad stood on the porch. Under one arm was a thick folder I recognized immediately. The original folder from the property transfer. He raised his fist and pounded on the door again. Dad was still pounding when I opened the door. We need to talk. His eyes went past me toward the kitchen. Adrian was standing beside the table where the city paperwork lay. Dad noticed it immediately. Have you signed that? No. Good. He walked inside carrying the thick folder under his arm. I closed the door. What is that? You know what it is. He placed the folder on my kitchen table and opened it. The original transfer documents. The same paperwork that had moved the Mill Creek parcel from my parents' names into mine. Dad began pulling pages out. Your mother and I went through everything. So did my attorney. This is different. How? Because we were there when this was done. We know what we intended. I looked down at the documents. Then show me. Dad stopped. Show you what? The part that says I have to return the property if it becomes valuable. His jaw tightened. Lenshina. The part that says I can't sell it. That isn't what I'm saying. Then show me the part that says you still own some of it. Adrian stayed silent beside me. Dad flipped through several pages anyway. There was nothing to find. The deed identified the entire 0.8-acre parcel. Robert Carter and Diane Carter were the grantors. I was the recipient. The transfer had been completed as a gift. There was no repayment clause, no shared ownership, no restriction against a future sale, no requirement to divide the proceeds. I looked at Dad. You brought me a folder proving the property belongs to me. His face hardened. You know this isn't only about paperwork. Then what is it about? $4 million. At least that answer was clear. Dad pushed the documents aside. Do you understand how much money that is? Yes. And you think one person should receive that because she happened to get lucky? I stared at him. Did you ask Melissa whether one person should receive your entire house? His mouth tightened. Stop comparing the two. Why? They are different situations. You keep saying that. Explain the difference. He looked toward Adrian. This is between my daughter and me. Adrian answered calmly. This is my house too, Robert. I'm staying. Dad looked back at me. Melissa has children. And? She needed stability. So you wanted her to have the major asset. That is not what I said. It's exactly what you said. He shook his head. Your mother and I were trying to help both of you. Then, what was the lot supposed to be? He didn't answer. I waited. What was it supposed to represent, Dad? He rubbed his forehead. You had complained before that we helped Melissa more. I pointed out the difference. And we were tired of everything becoming a comparison. So you gave us both property. Yes, but you gave her the house. She needed it. And you gave me the lot you didn't want. Dad looked at the table. That silence answered before he did. Finally, he said, we thought it was something you could have, so nobody could say you got nothing. I felt Adrian turn toward him. Dad seemed to realize what he had admitted. I asked quietly, so that was the point? I didn't say it like that. You just did. Lenshina, don't twist my words. I don't have to. I touched the folder. You gave Melissa the property you considered meaningful. You gave me enough property to make the gifts look fair. We did not know what would happen. That's the problem, Dad. You were comfortable with the decision until you found out I benefited more than you intended. He pushed his chair back. You are talking about your parents like we deliberately tried to hurt you. I'm talking about what you chose. Dad stood. You want me to admit I made a mistake? Fine. I made a mistake. No. I looked directly at him. You made a choice. The mistake was assuming you knew what that choice was worth. The front door opened before he could respond. Mom's voice came from the hallway. Robert? She entered the kitchen with Melissa behind her. Mom stopped when she saw the papers. Have you signed anything? Dad answered first. Not yet. Melissa looked at me. Can we please figure this out without everyone attacking each other? I almost smiled. Who is attacking you? I didn't mean me specifically. Mom placed her purse on the counter. We all need to calm down. I'm calm. She glanced at the city paperwork. Then listen to us. I have been listening. This land belonged to our family for decades, and now it belongs to me. Legally, maybe. Adrian raised his eyebrows. Mom caught herself. I mean, morally. I leaned against the table. What does that mean? It means your father inherited that property. It came through this family. If it produces $4 million, surely you understand that some of that belongs with the people it came from. I looked at Melissa. Does that apply to the house? Melissa immediately frowned. Why do you keep dragging my house into this? Because it came from the same people. That house is mine. So is the land. I've already started renovations. That doesn't change ownership. You know what I mean. Yes, I do. I turned toward Mom. Melissa believes a gift belongs to the person who received it. Melissa crossed her arms. Don't put words in my mouth. Then are you giving the house back? No. Are you dividing its value between all four of us? That would be insane. Then why is dividing mine reasonable? She stared at me. Mom stepped between us. Because nobody expected your property to become worth $4 million. And there it was again. I nodded slowly. That is the only difference. Mom's expression tightened. The amount matters. No, the amount revealed what mattered to you. Dad muttered, Here we go. I turned toward him. At my wedding, you made the decisions. You chose Melissa's gift. You chose mine. You signed the deed. Then I looked at Mom. You signed it too. Finally, Melissa. And none of you had a problem with those choices when everyone thought I got less. Nobody answered. I pulled out a chair and sat down. I didn't choose which daughter got the house. I didn't choose which daughter got the lot. I didn't choose the city's route. Mom looked exhausted. So you're keeping all of it. I'm keeping what you gave me. Melissa shook her head. You're enjoying this. No, you finally have something you can hold over everyone. I looked at her. I haven't asked you for $1 from your house. She went quiet. I haven't asked you to sell it. I haven't asked you to split it. I haven't told you that Mom and Dad made a mistake by giving it to you. Melissa looked away. All I'm asking is that the rule that protects your gift also protects mine. Dad sank back into the chair. For the first time since the calls started, there was nothing left to argue about without admitting the double standard outright. But I still needed one thing answered. Not by my parents. By the records. My attorney had already reconstructed the timeline, and before I signed anything with the city, I had him walk me through it one final time. Months before my wedding, the city had begun studying several possible corridors for a transportation expansion. Dad's parcel was inside the broader study area. That was why he had received those notices. But the notices did not say the city would buy his land. They did not say his parcel would be selected. And they certainly did not offer him $4 million. Dad had looked at them and decided they probably meant nothing. Shortly before my wedding, my parents chose to transfer property to both daughters. Melissa received their house. I received Mill Creek. The deed was recorded. The land became mine. Only afterward did the city formally select the preferred corridor that crossed my parcel. Acquisition authorization came later. The city then contacted the recorded owner, me. There had been no secret $4 million offer sitting on Dad's desk. There had been no information I had hidden from him. When my parents gave me the land, neither they nor I knew the city would choose that exact route. Dad had simply known there was a possibility of public works in the broader area and decided that possibility was too remote to make the land worth keeping. That decision belonged to him. What happened afterward belonged to me. Once the title review was complete, my attorney finished negotiations with the city. The acquisition remained approximately $4 million, subject to the taxes, legal fees, and ordinary closing costs that came with the transaction. I signed. The city acquired the parcel. I didn't buy a sports car. I didn't move into a mansion. Adrian and I sat down with a tax professional and a financial advisor before touching the proceeds. We paid off the remaining mortgage on our home. The majority went into a diversified long-term investment plan. Another portion stayed reserved for our future. For the first time in my adult life, I knew my financial security could not be threatened by a sentence I had heard in different forms for years. One day, this will all be yours. Think about your inheritance. Don't make decisions you'll regret. Family takes care of family. Those phrases had always sounded generous. Now I understood how often they had been used to keep me cooperative. Dad couldn't do that anymore. Mom couldn't either. The family story changed too. At first, Mom told relatives I had refused to make things right. Dad said very little, but too many people had been at the wedding. They remembered him handing Melissa the house. They remembered him giving me the lot. They remembered Uncle Raymond joking about it. They remembered Dad laughing. Aunt Sandra called me one afternoon. I told your mother something she didn't like. What? She said you were taking advantage of their generosity. I waited. Aunt Sandra continued. I told her you can't call it generosity when you think it's worthless, and theft when it becomes valuable. Mom stopped discussing the situation with her after that. Melissa kept the house. I never asked for a share. That mattered to me. I wasn't trying to reverse the favoritism by making her lose. I wanted the same principle applied to both of us. Her gift was hers. Mine was mine. My relationship with my parents did not end in one screaming match. Something quieter happened. I stopped giving them access to decisions they had previously assumed belonged to them. I stopped discussing my finances. When Mom organized family meetings to clear the air, I declined. When Dad hinted that there were still other assets to consider in the future, I didn't react. The promise of someday receiving something from them no longer had power over me. Months later, Mom said during one of our rare conversations, $4 million tore this family apart. I looked at her. No, Mom. She sighed. I knew you would say that. The money didn't create the difference between us. It made the difference impossible to hide. She didn't answer. Dad took longer. Nearly a year after the wedding, he asked me to meet him for coffee. He looked older than he had that night with the microphone. For once, he didn't bring paperwork. I was embarrassed, he said. I waited. When I gave Melissa the house, I thought I was doing the sensible thing. And when you gave me the lot, he stared into his coffee. I thought it was the smaller asset. I know. When the city offer came, everybody knew. That was the part that bothered you? He nodded reluctantly. It made me look like a fool. I sat back. There was the last piece. Not a conspiracy. Not a secret plan. Pride. Dad had publicly arranged our gifts according to the value he believed each one had. When the values reversed, he wanted to reverse his decision too. I can understand being embarrassed, I said. He looked up. But your embarrassment was never mine to pay for. He nodded once. I didn't forgive everything that afternoon. He didn't suddenly become a different father, but for the first time, he stopped asking for the money. A year after my wedding, Adrian and I drove out toward Mill Creek. The property barely looked like the place Dad had given me. The weeds were gone. Survey markers crossed the ground. Temporary fencing had been installed, and heavy equipment waited beyond it. The transportation project was finally moving into construction. We parked where we could see the site. Adrian looked across the land. Do you ever think about what would have happened if your parents had waited a few more months? All the time. Dad would have received the city offer. Melissa would still have had the house. And I probably would have been expected to smile and congratulate everyone. But that wasn't what happened. My parents had made a legal gift because they believed they understood exactly what they were giving away. I accepted it without complaining. Then the land changed everything. Not because it magically made me better than Melissa. Not because $4 million erased years of being treated differently. It changed everything because my parents could no longer decide that something was mine only while it was worth less. Adrian slipped his hand into mine. I looked across the construction site and remembered my wedding. Uncle Raymond laughing. Melissa calling it my field. Dad telling me the weeds were officially my problem. Then I remembered the 67 missed calls when those same weeds became worth millions. I smiled. They gave my sister the house because they thought she deserved more. They gave me the tiny lot because they thought it was worth less. I kept exactly what they gave me, and that was the last time they ever got to decide what I was worth.